So, hey everybody, this is a bit of an experiment here for us at Polymash. Everyone is moving online in these challenge times at the moment, and I thought I would do something for the podcasting community on my webpage and our YouTube channel to basically repeat some content in a presentation that I recently was lucky enough to give and present at PodFest. And the room was quite full, and I know that a few people couldn't attend. You know, we are all double booked. PodFest is so amazing. You've got all these sessions that you can go to simultaneously. I know I would have loved to attend a couple of sessions during when I was supposed to speak, and everyone was kind of like that. So, the room was super crowded, and so I thought that I would do in the coming days and in the coming weeks that I would do two things. One is to sort of repeat the presentation overview about podcast content marketing and SEO that I presented at PodFest. And then two, this is a part of our podcast marketing course to actually do some deep dives into the step-by-steps of how we actually do this for our podcasting clients. So I hope that makes sense. And, with that, let's get started and see how it goes. And if anybody does happen to be on this live stream, this is like the first time that I'm live streaming. As I said, it's a bit of an experiment. Do feel free to jump in, ask questions. I try to pay attention to the comments if there are any. And as we go on, I'm hoping that people will have a chance to participate, and I'll announce it with a little bit more leeway on email and so forth. I didn't really do that for this particular session, but you'll be able to see this catch this on the rebound and once it's live on YouTube. So with that, let's get started. So, hi, my name is Jürgen Barkessel from Polymash, and Polymash is a podcasting agency, and I'll give you just 2 seconds of background, as we get started. But what I wanted to share with you guys today and talk about is SEO content marketing and syndication, which has been working really, really well for our podcasting clients. And so, with that, let's get started and see whether we can make sense of this topic a little bit. So really for me, with this session, there are sort of two goals. One is to challenge our assumptions about the role that our websites, our podcast websites play, as well as about SEO and what it could do for your podcast growth. And then two is talk about a little bit and introduce some of the tools that have helped us flip the script and grow our podcast via web search, our client podcast via web search. I'll explain a little bit more as to, how I look at flipping the script, but that's kind of like what I call it. So just 2-second background. We started a digital strategy agency called Polymash about 10 years ago. We were app developers. We had about 10 apps in the iTunes store. And we had been providing digital strategy advice and services, for our clients. And about 7 years ago, we kind of discovered podcasting as a content strategy, and have been doing that ever since then. I'll tell the background story some other day. It's kind of funny because we thought that podcasting would be easier than blogging. And that's totally not the case. But we stuck with it because of how effective it is and how well it's worked. So with that said, let's just, dive right in. So many of us sort of feel like, I think we all appreciate that we're sort of in a golden age of podcasting. And I want to provide some anecdotal observations from us as a podcasting agency about what that looks like. So in the last 5 years, between 2014 and 2018, really most of our inquiries that we were getting were about starting new podcasts. How do I launch one? How do I get in the game? And what could we do to be podcasting ourselves? Those were mostly the questions that we were getting. But this last year, for the first time, we got more inquiries about marketing existing podcasts. And I started wondering why that was. And I think that this little quiz or this little stat illustrates it, because if you consider podcast growth in the last year. And I can't wait for the Infinite Dial study to come out again this year. I think it might happen in June or so, but this is the latest information from 2018, 2019. And I think many of us are familiar with the fact that podcast growth was 36%, like in the course of 1 year. There's 36% more podcasts out there. And then if you look at episodes, there are even more episodes out there. I think maybe because people are publishing more episodes, their daily podcasts. Add to that the fact that there's a lot of ad revenue coming into the space. Like 500, 600,000 episodes in 1 year. 18 million episodes in 1 year. I think we've just surpassed 800,000 podcasts available. Anyway, so all the growth has been phenomenal, except to say one thing. If you had to guess what was the listener growth during that time, well, the listener growth has only been 5%. And that really says something, doesn't it? Because it leaves us with a whole bunch of discoverability challenges. Something that we already knew as far as Apple podcasts goes. But there are a lot more high-quality podcasts now than there were ever before. But for relatively speaking, fewer listeners. And Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all the platforms, they don't cater to us as creators. What they're trying to do is they're trying to get the Ron Burgundy show found for, podcast listeners. So they're optimized for listeners and focused on listeners, not us, not the discoverability for us indie creators. And then also what we noticed is that the kinds of things that were working 5 years ago just aren't working anymore and probably won't work anymore going forward. But there is good news, because we just kind of need to rethink about how we think people find podcasts. This too is from the Infinite Dial study, and the number one way in which people search for and find new podcasts to listen to is Google search. That's really what matters for podcast discovery. And so that leaves us with some discoverability solutions. And this is what I mean by flipping the script, is starting to focus on our podcast website as a central discoverability asset, as the way that people will discover and subscribe to our show. Our show notes, our growth for our listener, for most of our clients, is over 65% of that comes from the fact that their show notes are searchable and are being discovered on Google and are driving new listeners to their show. The additional aspect of that is that we can focus on email list building. And for me, I would rather have 100 email subscribers who I have a relationship with, who I can understand and, communicate with, that are no longer anonymous. I'd rather have 100 email subscribers than 1,000 anonymous iTunes listeners who I have no idea who they are and what their persona is. So for me, the email list building is a lot more valuable, and I would think it's fair to say for most of our clients it is as well. So the way that we've positioned this is that with some strategic season and episode planning, with an intentionality to be discovered on SEO, you can start to flip the script and become, and have your website become the thing that drives new subscribers and podcast growth. So you might ask, well, are there some examples? Is there an ROI? Are there some numbers around that? And yes, there are. So consider this. This is a question that I get to ask at the Florida Podcasters Association. Chris Kremitzos, the founder of both PodFest and the Florida Podcasters meetup. That meetup is one of the biggest ones, I think the biggest one in the country, podcasting meetup. And so, we get to talk to podcasters there all the time. We ask them this question. Okay, so here is a brand new podcast launched about exactly a year ago, and it's had 190,000 downloads. And, whether that's, I'm not saying good or bad, but just for a podcast that had about 190,000 downloads within a year, how many listeners, how many of those people that downloaded these episodes do you think visited his website? This is a dating podcast done by author Ken Page. And most people that I ask this question say 5%, 25%. So that's what most people's guess is. And it's not 5, it's not 25, it's not 50, it's not 75. How about 138%? And you probably go, what? How is that even possible? Well, this is what I mean, is that for 190,000 downloads, he's had 261,000 people visit his podcast episode pages on his website. And this is what I mean by flipping the script. So these visitors are finding topics about that his podcast is about. They're finding those on the internet. They're stumbling across his show notes. They're discovering his podcast, and then they're subscribing. So it's not a matter of your podcast downloaders trying to visit your website and get them on your email list. It's about, getting people to discover your website, have that be SEO optimized, and people then stumbling across and subscribing to, becoming aware of your podcast. And of course, that's not where the benefits end. There's some real numbers to this. So here's the same podcast statistic from one of our SEO tools, and it shows that he's ranking organically now, a year later, brand new website, for 177 keywords that are resulting in 2,100 clicks a month and that are worth $2,000 a month. And what that means is that this is what you would have to pay Google if you wanted to rank for those keywords, right? So I can just go and buy my way into the search engine. I can buy some ad traffic, or I can buy certain keywords that if I can't rank for them, I can pay Google money to basically rank for them, and that would cost me $2,000 a month. So think about that. That's a lot during the year, and that's still not where it ends, right? I mean, because this graph is of his email list growth. So his email list has grown by over 30%. All the workshops that he holds have been sold out. The group coaching intensive that he holds have been sold out, and he's no longer in a position where he needs Facebook ads or webinars to basically promote his sold initiatives, which are, part of the reason that the podcast exists. I mean, it's a service, but it's also intended to help him as a business, as many of us have a podcast that augments our business, right? So that's what's possible. Even on my own show, I have the Podcast Growth Show, and that's a podcast that I ran, and I've badly pod faded, I have to admit. I had 10 episodes at the beginning of last year, but those 10 episodes are still a major contributor to the fact that I'm ranking for 200 keywords, about $3,000, and clicks to my website and so forth. So enough said. I think that this illustrates, and there are more examples like this, and in one of the future live streams maybe we'll drill in a little bit. But my point really is, what other free marketing method can you think of that would result in getting $3,000 a month of free traffic to your website, and having people sign up to your email list and subscribe to your podcast, right? So that's what we think about. All right, so the next section, I want to kind of talk about, well, how do you then do this, right? If you say, well, this sounds good to me, let's get started, I want to do this. Let me ask the question, how do you want people to find you on the internet, or find your podcast? So if I put in, the URL for your podcast, what is it that I'm going to see? Do you want the traffic? If somebody searches for, the name of my show.com, or the name of my show, what is it that you want to pop up in the search results? Is it Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify? What do you think? And here's an example. So here's a podcast called The Unseen Podcast. I just picked this kind of at random. And if I Google The Unseen Podcast, look what happens. Stitcher comes up in first place. Audio Boom in second place. Twitter in third place. Apple Podcasts in third place. So would that serve your podcast? And you could argue, well, maybe, but really the way we're looking at it is what you want is your website to be the thing that comes up in the search results when somebody types in. So here, Deeper Dating Podcast, the thing that comes up is the website, a couple of episodes, testimonials, information about, about the author. So I firmly believe that the website and your website sits at the center of your digital presence. And so you may then ask, well, okay, how does that happen? How do I get my website to be the thing that shows up? And there are a number of factors involved. And let's go through these really quickly. Domain authority is a industry metric that a company called Moz introduced. And there are the other factor that contributes a lot to whether your website ranks and also whether your posts and episodes or articles rank, or how many links are coming into your website from other people. And we're going to talk about that a little bit down the track here. Those are important. So that's one of the most important ranking factors. Have lots of links from other high-quality websites, and you will rank. The third one is long-form content. So in the case of podcasting, that means having show notes that aren't just a few words, but that are 2,000 or so plus words. And actually, for us as podcasters, we're a little bit lucky. It's easy for us to do that because we can get transcripts, and we can get transcripts to assist us in creating long-form show notes. Again, more on that later. Then there's also factors around how does your audience interact with your content. Things like bounce rate. So bounce rate is like when somebody comes to your website, do they scroll around? Do they click on other articles? Do they, are they interested? Do they read your articles and engage with your content in some way? So, that part's really important. And then lastly, social media traffic. There are also social signals is something that Google recognizes. All right, so these are the factors. What can we do about them? So the methods behind improving each one of these factors is another question. So domain authority is kind of a tough one because it's mostly baked around age. Domain authority is Google is 100. A brand new website is kind of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Someplace in the middle, like in the 20s or 30s, if your domain authority is about 30, you can start to rank content on search results in Google on page 1. Somewhere around there if you do research well. And we're going to cover a couple of tricks on influencing domain authority. Now, link building is something that we're really excited about because of content syndication. And what I mean by that is that if you take your podcast show notes and you publish them not just to your own site, but if you publish it to Medium, to Blogger, to a bunch of other websites, in the right way that doesn't trigger duplicate content penalties, but when you publish and syndicate your content to other sites, that earns you an instant backlink from those other sites, and that lets you rank lets your articles be discovered faster, lets them rank in the search results for certain key phrases that you think people might look for. So we'll go into the details in a little bit. So another thing that you can do that's part of this methodology is keyword research. And that's kind of knowing and guessing what your audience would be looking for. So if you're running a dating podcast like Ken is, topics around love and attraction and so forth, those might be keywords, or how do I find a partner, or what about a breakup, what to do if my girlfriend, those kinds of topics are topics that people search for on the internet. And he positions his episodes and episode titles and and the way that he's structuring his podcast so that people will discover him then for those key phrases. So keyword research is basically the use of tools that will help you in figuring out what people are actually looking for, and will also help you what your site can actually rank for. Then the on-page SEO, this is what people sort of mistakenly think of when they think of SEO as the only thing, right? It's sort of like, mucking around with your web content to optimize it for a particular key phrase. So on-page SEO has to do with optimizing your text and having headings and making sure that your text communicates to the Google search engines what your episode is about, and that it has the keywords multiple times and that sort of thing. So that's on-page SEO. And there are some amazing new tools out that make that dead easy to basically create. And then lastly, in terms of social signals, well, there are influencer campaigns and social media is like how and where you and your friends and other people and your fans share your content. That's what's important there. All right, so for the rest of this session, let's focus in on domain authority, on content syndication, and a little bit on on-page SEO. Because those are kind of interesting. So here's something that we get asked a lot. Some domain authority tricks for if you have a new podcast or if you want to launch one. How do you get over this fact that domain authority is mostly driven by age? So there are a couple of things. So first of all, when you consider whether you need a brand new website for your podcast, do you really need a brand new website? And the answer usually is no, if you already have one. So if you've got a personal or business website that's related to your topic, actually a better solution is to launch your podcast in a subdirectory under, mycurrentsite.com/podcast. And why? Again, because of that age thing. Your current website, if it's been around for a few years, is guaranteed to have a better domain authority than the brand new spanking podcast website that you just purchased and took out. That doesn't mean that was a waste. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do that and take out a domain that that lists your podcast. But what you can do is simply redirect. So you can redirect the traffic from my brand new podcast.com domain to my old website.com/podcast, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And in fact, then you inherit the domain authority, and your podcast will rank much faster than it otherwise would have. So so by all means, go and buy the new domain name for your podcast. But what the point is that do a 301 redirect if you can. For some people, this doesn't work, right? If you've got if you don't have a website, or your podcast is about something completely unrelated to your main website or your personal one or your business one, then sometimes you're just forced to have to start a new one. And in that case, here's a story that I want to share. And I've changed the names a little bit, but this was a client, and let's just call them the 5 Palms Capital Podcast, right? So they came to me and they said, look, we've got this great podcast. We are the 5 Palms Capital firm. We're real estate folks, and we want to launch this brand new real estate podcast. Sounds good. This podcast is about multifamily apartment investing. That's what we're teaching people. And lo and behold, I checked out the domain authority of the site, and it's 4, which is really low, and which is going to result in the 5 Palms Capital podcast.com or whatever it is, to not be able to get into the search results for quite some time. But what about this? So we did some keyword research, and I know the screen is a little detailed, but I'll explain it. So this is one of the tools that I'm introducing in this talk. It's called, from Mangools, it's called KW Finder, and it's dead simple and easy way to do everything that you need to do for SEO for your podcast or your website. And what we're looking at over here is that, so I typed in the word apartment investment because I was curious. And what the tool does is it offers you keywords ideas in this panel on the left. It tells you about how difficult it is to rank for a keyword on the right. And then it shows you the top 10 search results for that keyword on the right-hand lower panel. And that's basically your competition. And what's important here, and what I want to point out, is the domain authority of the competitors, right? So these are the people that are showing up in the search results, all have a 50, a 25, a 50, a 95. So these are all high-powered sites. And of course, with a domain authority of 4, you would have a hard time breaking into the top 10 and having a presence in the search results yourself. Does that make sense? But let's think again. A couple of things I want to point out. So first of all, this is a good keyword. There's actually 1,300 people searching for it every month. So apartment investment, is a good keyword to have. And it's still, according to this tool, relatively easy to rank for, right? Like anything under like 30. The keyword difficulty is low. And then I look down the column of, who's already on page 1, and look at that. There's somebody there with a domain authority of 3. How is that possible? How did somebody with domain authority of 3 get on page 1? That's very unusual. Well, the reason is that, look at the domain name, apartmentinvestmentfund.com. So the search term, apartment investment, is part of the domain name. It is, practically the domain name. And that's the real secret that you can use if you still have a new podcast. So for this firm, instead of the 5 Palms Capital podcast, name it the Apartment Investment Podcast. And when I wrote this, apartmentinvestment.com was still an available domain name. You could also take out apartmentinvestmentpodcast.com. And wouldn't that make a much better name for the podcast anyway? Even if you were coming across it in Apple or an Apple podcast or in Spotify, wouldn't you know that, this is, that's going to teach me about apartment investment? 5 Palms Capital, I might just gloss over that because, I have no idea what that might be about. But apartment investment podcast just clearly communicates the mission. And so I think it's, a good idea in any way. But the main point here is that this would result in guaranteed traffic to your site within weeks of the launch, because you would get onto page 1 of Google with this name almost in a guaranteed way. So that's a little domain trick. That's how SEO research can help you when you're launching a new podcast, is to consider, the name of your podcast. Even if the name of your podcast was slightly different, but you had that domain, apartmentinvestment.com, if you had 5 Palms Capital Apartment Investment, and that was the name of your show, I'm not suggesting that, but, and then you just send people to apartmentinvestment.com, that would also still work. So kind of hope that, that makes sense. All right. So another aspect is, does it even matter who you host your podcast with? If you're on Libsyn versus Anchor, for example, or SoundCloud. And the answer is, yep, it kind of does, because of something called permalinks. And what permalinks are, it's embedded in your RSS feed, is a link to your podcast episode. And what is that link? And for many of us, that link might be to an MP3 file on someone else's website, on Anchor's website, for example. And the reason that that's a bad idea, and the reason that you don't want that, is this. This earns you links to your episodes from other sites are important ranking factors. It's because they create backlinks. And if your podcast feed points to, Anchor, then Anchor is reaping all the benefit. It's something that I call digital sharecropping. That's a term Nicholas Carr started in the Web 2.0 days. And the idea there is that, you build your online presence, on someone else's platform. If the only place your business exists is on Facebook, you're kind of in trouble a little bit, because Facebook might change the rules and often does. And so this idea that, you're providing content and you're gaining traffic and they are showing ads, you're doing all the work, but they're reaping the benefits. And that's the idea behind digital sharecropping. And so to prevent digital sharecropping, what we strongly advocate is building your website, as the center of your digital presence and digital universe. And so that means that you're looking for those links. You're looking for traffic inbound, not outbound. And so that's what we're talking about here. So let me show you an example. Here's a podcast on Anchor. And if I now go and share this on social media, right? I'm clicking here, sharing this on Twitter, and look where the traffic goes, Anchor FM, right? So any share, any social share, any link, that's likely to happen. Any social signal, it's earning Anchor FM, Google Rank Juice, it's earning them traffic. That's where it goes. Instead, what you want is, like with Libsyn, you can put in a custom permalink. And that means that when somebody tweets your episode, it's going to deeperdatingpodcast.com, right? It goes to the actual episode show notes page for that particular episode. And that's what you want. That's what's, much, much better. And so that's what basically creates your backlink profile over time. And that in turn is a major factor on how your website ranks. So you're starting to get inbound links from Spreaker, from Stitcher, from Libsyn, from elsewhere where your podcast is being distributed to. You can do that by manipulating your description too on the podcast, when you launch it. But still, I'm saying that it's a good idea to use permalinks. All right. So, last section of this, of this session, and that is content syndication and SEO content marketing. So, what is this method exactly? Now that we're assuming that maybe we have permalinks, maybe we have a website, maybe the website is positioned correctly on Google and it's giving us a chance. So now, how do we take the best advantage of our podcast episodes? And we've developed a methodology behind it over time with most of our clients. So it sort of happens in different phases. And just hold on to your hats, because this is going to look complicated and it's not. That's what I'm here to tell you mostly. So there's a SEO research part. There is creating click-worthy episode titles for a number of reasons. There is creating long-form show notes. We're using transcripts for that. Then optimizing the headings and subheadings and keyword frequency on those show notes, adding some images, making sure that the readability of the show notes is good, and then going through this multi-site syndication of the content, sending out and distributing these podcast show notes to a bunch of different places, and running the social media influencer campaign. And lastly, analytics to make sure that we're working on the right thing. And that sort of basically splits this into 3 different categories of SEO research: on-page SEO and off-page SEO. And I can already hear you saying, why does SEO have to be so complicated? And what I'm here to tell you is that it's not, and it doesn't have to be. Our staff can do this in 20, 30, 40 minutes for an episode, and compared to, and there are tools that I want to introduce you to that take you by the hand and just show you step by step what needs to be done. And it's not very time consuming. When I think about it, the time that it takes to prepare for, to invite, to create good audio, to record it, to, all the other time that you're already baking into your podcast production, this is a small add-on from the way that I look at it. So the tools that I want to talk about here, have to do with Mangold's suite of tools for, SEO research as well as on-page SEO, and finding keywords. It has to do with StoryChief and Yoast and a number of other tools that help you once you're creating your show notes. And then it also has to do with analytics and tracking. So let's take a closer look at each one of the steps in this process. So first of all, the research. And that's the one part that out of all of this, all these steps, the rest of them are easy. This is the one that's still a little bit artful. So if you think of SEO people as there's some wizardry involved in it, or there's some artistry involved in it, this is the only part that's true for. But you can learn it. It's recognizing your audience. It's really being close to your audience, understanding how they consume your content, understanding your content and how somebody might search for it. And then you want to make sure that what you optimize your show notes for, that those key phrases and keywords actually have some traffic behind it, right? I mean, I could optimize for a key phrase, but if there's 0 searches for that key phrase a month, it's not going to do you any good. And at the same time, if I wanted to rank, for example, for the word podcast, impossible, right? There's like of course, there's tens of thousands of people searching for that, but the competition is way too fierce. So it's matching, it's recognizing what keywords can you rank for. What is your site commensurate with, what rank does your site have? And over time that changes, but basically that piece of the keyword research is a sort of a critical aspect of figuring out what it is what key phrases you're targeting for your episodes. And what makes that easier is KW Finder, the tool set that I just showed you, and then also Site Profiler, because it'll tell you how you compare to your competition. And what we do is we have some Google Sheets on Trello to do seasonal planning. The good news is that you only have to do this like once every half year if you want. This doesn't have to happen with every episode. You sit down once every 3 months and you make up a bunch of topics that you might want to talk about in your upcoming season. And then you do the key phrase research and you identify the opportunity keywords that people actually search for, that have some traffic associated with them. And then you write them all down and you basically start developing your episode titles from that. And it doesn't have to change what your conversation is about with your guests. It's just that you have those on standby and you can optimize and be found for those keywords and for those, for the research that you did. Secondly, episode titles. Well, for me, that's a huge factor, right? If you're showing up in the search results and your episode title is TWC episode 515 interview with Joe Schmo, that doesn't tell me anything. That's not going to get me excited. That's not going to get me to click. Same with blog articles. It's really figuring out what's exciting for titles. And that's true also when you're showing up in an app, right? If I'm browsing through Apple Podcasts and I'm looking at episodes that I might want to listen to, like that, I need to find an interesting title. I have a theory that podcast episode consumption behavior is actually becoming more and more search-based, right? So that it's like YouTube, where people are typing in something that they want to listen to and they listen to one episode. So make sure your episode titles are good. We use a tool called Co-Schedule Headline Analyzer. And by the way, at the end of this, I have a link to download all these tools and and get links for that. But Co-Schedule Headline Analyzer is a free tool, and it sort of ranks and rates your title based on sort of, how viral it might be. And it prompts you to try again and again. And I'm not saying that this algorithm is so amazing. It's not. I think it's more the fact that you try 7 times to improve your top podcast title. And I guarantee you the 7th one will be better than the first one that you started out with, if that makes sense. So we love this. We love going through this tool. I'm always skeptical when I first start. I'm like, that doesn't look right. But I'm just going back here for a minute. I'm often sort of skeptical with that tool and thinking like, well, okay, let me try. But if I keep at it and by the time I do the 7th or 8th iteration, I'm like, yeah, that's it. I know a good word to use. They give you emotional words and power words to use and things like that. I don't believe in that. Stay true, stay descriptive, be authentic with your titles, but make them work for your audience. Tell the audience what this show is about, and get them a little bit excited about wanting to click on that title when they see it on your website or on an app. All right. Then the long form show notes via transcript. So this has to do with Google's view on authority content. And what Google thinks of as authority content, their algorithm is getting smarter and smarter, and this is emerging. This is never standing still, and there's no easy way to cheat Google or have shortcuts here. But what is true is that posts that are 300 words or less will seldom rank for podcasts, episode show notes, blog posts, whatever. So 700 words is kind of a minimum. If you've got a well-established site, sometimes you can get in the search results with 700 words or so. But really, there's an inflection point at about 2,000 words. There's another one at 5,000 words, but leave that as it is. So the good news is that you can use a transcript for a half an hour episode will result typically in 1,000 to 3,000 words. But you can't just paste it. You can't just paste the transcript raw as it is on the bottom of the show notes. I think Google's algorithm is too smart for that, and it gets destroyed with readability and with a number of other things. So don't just paste your transcript on the bottom of your show notes. You've got to do something to them. Anyway, the tools that will help you are Story Chief. Then if you're working on WordPress, it's Yoast. If you're on a website like Squarespace or Wix, for example, there are some third-party tools like Textmetrics, for example, that will also allow you to paste in your content, and it will coach you step by step through SEO optimizing that content. And that's what I'm going to do a mini demo at the end of this where you can see how easy that has become. But so here's an example. This is what I meant is that when you click through the show notes this is a transcript-based show note article, but it doesn't look like it. Right? We're disguising the fact that this has got quotes, it's got images, it's got captions, it's got subheadings, and so forth. Right? So we're disguising the fact that this, originated from a transcript. And it's kind of like a beautiful looking long form article. So that's the point. Don't just paste on the bottom. You've got to add headings and subheadings and follow a hierarchy for those. And again, Story Chief, Yoast, Textmetrics, those tools will help you do this and will help you coach through which heading, where you should do that. Images are an SEO factor. So adding images to your show notes and to your posts, and then adding something called an alt tag, that's basically the thing that the browser will read out to a visually impaired person. And Google tracks that, right? So any image that you put in should have an alt tag, and then you can put your key phrase into the alt tag occasionally. Still make it make sense so that the image is, if a web reader read out your web page content, that the image description would still make sense. But that has also a discernible effect on how well your page will rank in Google and whether you show up on page one or not. And Story Chief, Yoast, Textmetrics, they will coach you through that. They will warn you. They will say, hey, you've got an image here. You forgot to put the alt tag in, right? So it's just a matter of following their instructions. Readability is an SEO factor. We did tests where, we had the same article, and just by fixing the readability of the article, it improved its rank. I won't go into, the scores that are behind it, the algorithms that are behind it. Suffice it to say that, again, our 3 tools that I'm mentioning are helping you do that. And so then lastly, this multi-site syndication link building, that is the most important factor to quickly get things up into the search results. So when I had my season, I think some of my episodes wound up in the search results within 2 or 3 weeks. That's typically the time that it might take for Google to index something and for it to show up. So when you send your show notes out to Medium and to Blogger, to your own site, if you have another site, send it to that. If you've got a partner that you're partnering with, post these episodes on his website as well and have some exchange. There's a concept called ambassadors where you exchange and support each other on social media. So all of those things wind up contributing. And the only tool that really does this for you is this tool called Story Chief that I'm mentioning. So social influencer campaigns, I'm not going to go into great detail here, but that's if you can get other people to share your episode show notes, those social signals that are coming in to Google will again contribute to your website's rank. And when you use a tool like the one that I showed you earlier, the KW Finder, you will see entries there. You can start tracking how well your episodes are ranking in terms of search results. And that's what I mean by analytics as well. SERP Watcher is the tool with which you can sort of track how well your content is doing and what keywords you're starting to rank for and where you are. And the reason that's most important is because of an opportunity that many people miss. It's focusing on promotion of the content that sits on page 2. Because, let's face it, if you're on page 2 or 3 or 4, you're going to get very little traffic. Most of the traffic, this is simply truth, comes from being on page 1 of Google. Not necessarily position one, although that's true, but somewhere to be found in the top 10, top 8 search results. You're going to get a massive amount of traffic compared to being on page 2 and 3. And so often, if you're already on page 2 with something, if you're tracking what you're doing and you're seeing, like, look, here are 5 episodes that are currently sitting on page 2, then you can target. You can run some, a Facebook campaign. You can run a social media campaign. You can, do some link building or ask a buddy to share this or feature it on their site. And often those things make the difference to transport it from page 2 to page 1. And at that point, you'll see a pretty good influx of traffic. All right, so we're almost to the end. I mentioned this tool called Story Chief, which we're very high on. It's a Belgian company, and that's what we use exclusively now to produce all of our client show notes on. And you're already syndicating your audio. So when you're distributing your MP3 file to Apple Podcasts, it gets sent out via RSS feed to all the listening platforms out there and to all the podcatchers out there. So why not do the same thing with your show notes? Because that earns you those backlinks, the critical backlinks from content hubs like Medium and Blogger. It's getting sent out to social media as well as to your ambassadors and to other places, including sort of like Google My Business and other. There's lots of value in syndicating your show notes. So the platform, when I first started, didn't really support podcasting, but I've been fortunate to build a relationship with these guys, and they've started steadily to add podcast support. So Libsyn was the first platform that they had on there. My own podcast now is on Whooshka, and they got that going within a matter of weeks. So if your podcast's not on this list, chances are that they will work with you, because the platform, in addition, to being kind of amazing at doing all of this, is also very affordable. Plans start at only like $12 a month. Anyway, the platform itself is an editing environment. So you are liberated from working in WordPress or working on your website directly. You get a very simple editing environment, and you just paste in a link for your podcast player, and it resolves it. In fact, it's got a few clever tricks built in. For example, an image search engine. So for here, you can type in some word, and it actually puts in the image from millions of images on Unsplash and just pastes it right into your show notes. You can even edit and crop these images to your heart's content. So that's an awesome feature. It also lets you embed other sort of rich content, like, for example, tweets or videos, of course, and lots of other things. So if it's an open embed enabled platform that you can paste content into, Story Chief will display it. And so the good news is not just here, but on Medium, on Blogger, on your WordPress site, anywhere that this content is distributed to, these rich snippets and these capabilities are available as well. And in addition to that, it's got lead capture, it's got a content calendar built in. So it's got a lot of, Zapier automations, if you've got marketing automation platforms, it supports all of those. But all of this pales, for the purpose of this call, to what I'm really here to tell you, and that is SEO. It's got built-in SEO coaching, and that's the most important part, right? So if you look at the sideline here, the sidebar here on the right, when you first start putting in your content, the SEO coaching will appear and will take you step by step through and explain what it is you're doing. So you're actually learning how to SEO optimize your content and to drive up your scores, a little gamified, right? As you fix all of these issues, your SEO score starts to increase. And the same with readability. It will give you concrete tips, and when you can click on the links, and it'll actually transport you to where the problem is and explain how to fix it. So it's basically, you've got a built-in SEO coach. You can collaborate with other people in social media. It's got lots of other amazing features, but this for using this for show notes, and for getting your VA or your team to do this for you or to learn how to do it yourself, this is an awesome platform to use. And then when you publish to all of those additional platforms, it's the best feeling when you hit publish, and it goes live on like 16 different locations, and starts earning backlinks, and you start seeing the results very quickly. So that's sort of like at the heart of one of our, of what we do for our clients. And I'm going to be launching a sort of masterclass on exactly step by step how we use these tools as we go on. But so just the tool summary is storychief.io. That's the that's what we're using. I'm going to have a couple of affiliate links at no extra cost to you. That's just a disclaimer that I want to list here. So storychief.io is the content syndication platform with the SEO coaching built in, and they've been generous enough to give me a 10% coupon, and you can get that at polymash.com/podfest. You can still sign up for that now. The plan is actually they do have a free plan that you can try out, and then, as I said, the basic plans that you really need to do this seriously, start sort of at like $12 a month, which is very affordable. The other tool that I mentioned was Text Metrics, and that's for the folks on Wix and Squarespace and not on WordPress. I'm, of course, a huge WordPress fan because, I just think that, if you're running a business or running any serious podcast, there are 8 million developers creating amazing solutions on the WordPress environment and ecosystem. And so I'm a huge WordPress fan, but I know that some people might not be able to, leverage WordPress or have not their WordPress, their websites are on different hosts. So Text Metrics is an alternative. And then the tool set that you saw me use here, and that my upcoming live streams are going to be deep dives and we'll teach how to use, is called Mangools. And again, you can get the link to that at polymash.com/podfest. And it's got all the SEO suite of tools that you would need to sort of like run a podcast or a business. And it's one of the most affordable ones out there that it gets the job done. The Co-Schedule Headline Analyzer, as I mentioned, that's the tool that coaches you through improving your titles and making them more clickable. And basically that's it. That brings us to, the end of the live stream. And if anyone had questions, I would have seen them pop up in the chat. Given that I didn't really announce this live stream, there haven't been any questions. And with that, I am just going to publish this video now on YouTube, on our Facebook group, Facebook Live and elsewhere. And upcoming will be some deep dives into this content and into what we do. So let me know your comments on whatever platform that you're listening or viewing this on, and we will see you next time. So signing off, this is Jürgen from Polymash. Ciao for now.